Okay. Yo, I'm ready whenever you are. If you want to say
All
anything.
right. I think we've got everybody on. Oh, we got some people still joining. All right. First, thanks, Elon, for joining us. I told my class a little bit about you. I'm going to leave you to do an introduction, but we've got both our research and seminar class here. Seminar class, they're kind of learning about research, and then the research class is learning how to research and actually conducting their own project. So we're excited to hear about yours. It's always good to hear what other people are doing and get some ideas. Um, Ilan is a friend of mine. We play frisbee together. He also works here for NOAA. How long have you been here, Elon?
About a year so far.
About a year. Yeah, and Elon just recently got some work published that he's going to share with us, and I'll leave the rest to you from here. Thanks for
Okay.
joining us, Elon.
Absolutely. Well, hi everyone. Please feel free if my audio cuts off or my video cuts off. Please interrupt me. Don't want you missing anything. And yeah, so just to give a quick introduction, I wanted to say that I am from Florida. I got my background is in environmental science, and I got my master's degree in marine biology. And I came out here to study fires, actually on Saipan, among this fellowship between BCU, the Bureau of Environmental and Coastal Quality, and NOAA. And you might be asking, why would marine biologists want to study fire? And really, the main concern out here is that fires actually really heavily impact our coral reefs. And that happens when fires burn away vegetation, which leaves a lot of soil unrooted now. And so when the next rain event comes around, this rain sloughs off all that soil that's no longer held back by vegetation, and it puts it into the waters, into our coastal waters. So fires actually facilitate erosion, and it leads to the sedimentation of our coral reefs. And so when all the soil is now on top of our coral reefs, they can actually no longer photosynthesize, and it really harms them. It makes them less productive, makes them less likely to reproduce. And in general, it is one of the leading causes of coral declines here in the CMI. So fires are really actually important to study in order to conserve our marine environment. And that is actually what I was brought out here to do. I am a spatial ecologist. That is my background. I study the spatial patterns of environmental phenomena. And so they wanted me to study where fires are occurring and how often fires are occurring. So that's a big question, like that big spatial question of fires. But what I wanted to present to you all today is one very tiny aspect of that question. And that is how fires are changing over time here in Saipan. And I'm going to show you the presentation is going to be an entire walkthrough of this research project, starting with asking a question and going all the way through methodology, interpreting results, and then finally presenting it. Because what is science if you're not presenting and sharing the knowledge that you are creating? So let's just kind of start off here. I might ask you all some questions along the way, keep it a little bit interactive. If that ends up being a little bit too hard over Zoom, you can just kind of breeze through it, but we'll try. So I just wanted to show you all three scientists first who use the scientific method. Hopefully we all know Albert Einstein, famous for using the scientific method to understand the world around them. At the bottom right here, we actually have a local scientist, David Benavente. He's a fisheries biologist, and he studies fish and coral and how decline in corals results in decline of fish. A very important guy. He's been a mentor for me out here as well. And then this upper right is Gladys West. And I wish she was a little bit more of a household name because she studied essentially how the Earth is shaped. Because it's not a sphere, it's not an ellipsoid. It's a rough pattern with bumps and ridges all around. And thanks to her models, we actually have GPS. Basically, she is the reason that we have any satellites in space. Anything that has geoposition, we can thank her for that. The reason I don't get lost on my way to work is thanks to her. So all three people are quite important and have used the scientific method. And I've been saying this, but I'm assuming we have a general understanding of what the scientific method is a step-by-step process that allows us to go from a question that we have about the world around us to get to the end, to answer that question and communicate these results to other people. I want to make sure that we understand that this process is really iterative. So it's not just a step by step by step. In fact, as you go along, you might learn something new and go back a step. You might retest your hypothesis. You might come up with new methods to test your hypothesis. And as you do that, you're going to get a better and better understanding of the world around us. So the first step is just asking a question. And this might be the most fun and easy part of the whole process, because all you have to have is an inquisitive mind. You want to look out there and say, what are these fires doing to our coral reefs? Why are they doing it? And from there, you can really just continue on. Once you have that question about the world around you, you can start doing background research. And this background research is a really important part of the process, because the world is big. There's been a lot of people who have been studying things, and almost nothing that you have asked has not been asked before. And so you don't want to start things from scratch, right? You want to build upon what other people have started. You might ask a novel question, but that question is going to have its base among what science has already done in the past. So for me, I have been studying the various management plans that Saipan has. And multiple management plans have actually talked about fire. We have our standard state mitigation plan, our forestry action plan, and our wildlands fire plan. And all of these talk about the patterns that they see fire out here on Saipan. But what all three of these have shown me is that there are a lot of knowledge gaps. And one of the largest knowledge gaps is about how fires are actually changing. We know we've had fires since 2000. We know we have fires this summer, but do those fires differ? Are they in different places? Are they more intense? These are the types of questions that have not been asked yet. But additionally, outside of just management plans, we want to look at the world around us. Guam, for example, has the exact same problem with fires that Saipan does. We see the same thing in Hawaii, massive fires that are occurring in our watersheds that lead to more erosion. California, we've all seen the apocalyptic fires that are out there. And what this shows is that the question that I'm not asking is not just relevant to Saipan, it's relevant to a lot of different places. And drawing upon the lessons learned or the studies that other people have done in these other locations can really help me either maybe come up with a new methodology to answer this question, or give me new insights on how to further my question or how to study it. So it's really important to look at places that might be asking the same questions that you are. But once you've done your background research, you need to start forming your hypothesis. And this hypothesis is based off of your research. Essentially, your hypothesis is an educated guess about the phenomena that you are seeing. And a good hypothesis kind of has want to talk to a classical scientist, they're going to say it has 5 aspects to it. One, it's novel, it's new. It doesn't have to be completely new. It might be just this tiny edit to some existing theory, but something that you are asking, some component of what you're asking is new. It's specific. You're not just asking some wide-reaching question, right? You want it to be very specific so that you can tailor your experiment or methods to answering it. It's measurable. This is something that you can either measure quantitatively or qualitatively with numbers or descriptions. But at the very least, it has to be measurable so that you are able to test it, or you're able to maybe not prove it, but to lead evidence to show that your hypothesis is correct or not. It's actionable. Once you have your hypothesis, you can actually test it. You can actually go out and test it. You can measure it somehow. It'd be very, very hard to make a hypothesis about something on Venus or some way out there in space if you're not able to take action on it, if you're not able to measure it. And it's relevant. This one, This one is, subjective, but in general, a good hypothesis is going to be one that is relevant to the world around us. Fires are very relevant to Saipan, right? So that makes it the hypothesis that I'm creating is relevant to the area that I am in. This is a class. I'm not sure if any of you have all seen the elephant toothpaste experiment. When I was judging science fair projects, I saw like 5 of these. But it's a type of experiment that I like to kind of put under this category of let's just see what happens. And it's basically just mixing 2 chemicals or putting 2 things together and just like seeing what happens when you do that. And that's not really a good hypothesis. That's not an experiment. It's not really novel. Plenty of people have done it before. It's not very specific. How are you measuring it? Are you looking at how much toothpaste was created? So you want to kind of stray away from these kind of just very open-ended, let's just see what happens types of experiments. So for me, my hypothesis is based off of the question, how are fires changing on Saipan? Well, my background research informed me that climate change has an impact on fires. We see that Guam, Hawaii, California have increasing the number of fires and an increasing intense amount of fires. So my hypothesis might be something like the number of fires on Saipan in the past 2 years have been larger than fires in the past. And this gets at this very specific question of trying to understand, I'm not asking, has climate change impacted fires, right? Because that's a pretty big question. That'd be really hard to prove. But what I can see is have the dynamics, have the spatial patterns of fire changed recently compared to the past. And that can provide us a lot of really good actionable results because it can influence management plans. It can tell us how we might be worried about our corals in the future. But it's specific, it's novel, actionable, measurable, and relatable. So testing and methodology. Of course, this is like the meat of the scientific method, right? This is how you're actually doing everything. Methods are usually determined from your background research. I studied all these other experiments that were done on other islands to figure out how people have measured fires in the past and how people have quantified the number of fires on land. And in general, almost all, at least qualitative research, maybe not quantitative, establishes a comparator. And this is really important because the comparator is what allows you to compare what you are studying to a baseline to see if something has changed or to see if something is different. So in an experimental survey or study, an experimental study, you might look at, say you're looking at coral bleaching in the ocean. You might have one group of corals that you're looking at you've done nothing to, and another group of corals that you've planted seagrass around. And the one that you've done nothing to, your control, is your comparator, because it's what you are controlling, or is what you are comparing against the corals that you actually did something to see if they actually benefited the corals in any way. So comparators are really important, and it can be experimental. It can be the before and after experiment, or it can be data from previous experiments. So like I said, so many other studies have looked at fires in the past. I might compare my fires to their fires and have that be the comparator. Really importantly, you want to just figure out whether your study is going to be observational or experimental. And this has really important implications for your study because observational studies can only show that there's a correlation between what you're studying, while experimental tests can actually show causation. And this is a little graph to make sure that you understand that principle of causation versus correlation. Imagine you're in a really hot day and you notice that the hotter the day is, the more people you see having ice cream. But on those hotter days, you also see more people getting sunburns. Those are causations. The sun is causing people to eat more ice cream or to get more sunscreen. But there's a correlation, if you just measured ice cream and sunburns, that as ice cream is eaten more, you also see more sunburns. But eating ice cream is not causing your sunburns, and sunburns is not causing you to eat ice cream. So that's just a correlation. And so you always need to be very careful when you do observational studies, because you can't show that something causes something else. You can only show that something is related to something else. And this is just a fun little side, because I had this problem actually when I was supervising a experiment done by an undergrad back in grad school. And I want to see what you all think about this. So this undergrad wanted to study how parasites in oysters impact the strength of their shell. So oysters get these tick-like parasites in North Carolina, and they're really disgusting. No one wants to eat them when they see a little bug in it, so they're quite important. We want to understand these parasites. And what she theorized, so she asked this question, and she created this hypothesis that as oysters get more and more parasites, their shells get more and more brittle. So what she did was she collected hundreds of oyster shells and then put it in a press, like the one that you see right here. And she added weights to the lever 1 pound at a time until the shell cracked. And once the shell cracked, she recorded how much weight it took to crack the shell, and then counted the amount of parasites that she found within the shell. And what she found was something like this, that so along the x-axis is weight. So at 100 pounds of weight, she found an average of 7.5 parasites, compared to at 10 pounds of weight, she found 17.5 parasites. So what she was showing was that as the weight increased to crack the shell, the amount of parasites that she found decreased. Could someone take a shot and try to interpret those results? What, if you saw this data, what would the conclusion be that you come to?
Any takers? Be sure to unmute.
I'll give you 5 seconds. Okay, no worries. It's harder over Zoom. But it makes sense. What they're showing is, and what the conclusion that she came to was that parasites cause a weakening in the oyster shell. Now, that's a problem because you can't come to that conclusion, because this is an observational study. You can't show that parasites cause a weakening in the shell. This is instead, you could come to the exact same conclusion that a weak shell might cause more parasites. See how it could go either way? Until you do an experimental study showing or experimentally creating different classes of oyster shells, you couldn't show specifically that the parasites are what causing the weakening of the shell. If the actual explanation was that a weaker shell allows more parasites in, you would see this exact same data coming out from your experiment. So this is just an aside, an example to show that whether you are having an observational or an experimental study really impacts the conclusions that you can come to and how you communicate your results in the end. But let's get back to fires here. I just want to get, I wanted to study, I wanted to quantify the amount of fire that has occurred on Saipan. Now, how would I do this? My methods were to use something called the Landsat satellite. So NASA has this awesome program called Landsat that they've produced 8 satellites that have orbited the Earth. Currently, we have Landsat 8, and the way it works is that the satellite orbits the Earth, taking pictures of all the land masses. And it takes a picture of every single spot on land every 2 weeks, which means that we have a picture of Saipan from space every 2 weeks from 2013 to present, which is phenomenal. It's just an incredible amount of data that allows us to look at how Saipan has changed over time. And what this camera has on it is different sensors that allows us to see wavelengths or light at different wavelengths, from visible all the way to infrared. And this is important because vegetation reflects healthy vegetation reflects different wavelengths than burnt vegetation. And you can see here on this graph that healthy vegetation, the green line, reflects near infrared a lot more, near infrared wavelength. Near infrared is that like heat light that you see with like night vision goggles. Night vision goggles are looking at infrared. So if you're looking at plants, you would see a lot of reflection away from them because they reflect a lot of infrared light. But burnt vegetation does not. They reflect almost no infrared light. So you can use this discrepancy in the amount of light that burnt and healthy vegetation reflect to discriminate between burnt and non-burnt vegetation through Landsat on Saipan. So this is an incredible tool that many people have used to study fires across the entire world. And my previous research allowed me to come across this methodology. So in the end, my methodology was I decided on a before and after comparison. I calculated the amount of acres that burned in the dry season in 2019, 2020, and I compared it, my comparator, to the before, the dry season of 2013 to 2018, to determine if there is a change in the amount of vegetation that had burned on Saipan. So just to show you what Landsat looks like, on the right, this is what just a regular picture from Landsat looks like. So you can see all the clouds, and that clouds are actually really important because it blocks the satellite from taking pictures of the ground. But in a clear image, fairly clear image like this, you can see almost all of Saipan. And when you look at that discrepancy between infrared light, what you see is that fires really pop out. So on this right image, you see in green, all that is super healthy vegetation. And then you see these red spots near Wireless Ridge. Those are the fires that occurred. So this image was taken, I guess, May 2018. And there are massive fires in 2018 in Wireless Ridge that you can see here in this image. And specifically, what I wanted to do was quantify how many acres are actually being calculated as burnt. So the entire process to do this is a 7-step process. First one, you collect your Landsat imagery. 2, you create that index that is called a burn area index, which is that discrepancy between the shortwave infrared light between healthy and burnt vegetation. So you can see here in black that those in step 2, the black areas, those are the really burnt areas. Step 3, so step 3 is an indication that Landsat images are actually massive. This image actually goes from the Northern Islands all the way past Guam. So we don't want that much area in this analysis. So step 3 is cutting that image to the borders of Saipan itself. And then because these values go on a range from -1 to 1, we want to threshold it, which means changing that range into a binary from burnt to not burnt. So in this step 4, what we're seeing is in red, all the fires that are highlighted in this image, compared to in green, everything that is not burnt. So we're starting to actually identify the individual fires here that are taken in this Landsat image. But you can see along here on the coast, there's a lot of these small fires. And that's probably not right because we know that everything from CK up to Garapan is pretty urban. We're probably not going to have any big fires around there. And what I found out, again, through my background research, is that urban areas reflect light in a similar way that fires do. And so we need to remove all these areas that we know can't possibly catch fire, all these roads, these concrete houses. And we do that in step 5. We subtract away the entire urban environment away from this image. And in step 6, we are left with just these smaller fires that we know are coming from grasslands, from forests, from scrub areas. Now, there's a little accuracy assessment when you deal with models. You all in your research probably won't be creating models, but essentially you're troubleshooting your model to see, does it work, what aspects of it work or not, and you can refine your model to be much more precise. So you can get step 7, which is your final fire count. So, like I said, you have an image every 2 weeks. You have this exact same image every 2 weeks, and you do this process for every single one of those images from 2013 to 2020. And what you're left with is an entire catalog of fire history on Saipan that allows you to show how fires have changed, not only over from 2013 to 2020, but seasonally as well, between dry seasons and wet seasons. So let's recap. I asked my question. I looked at how fire dynamics are changing on Saipan. I did my background research looking at academic journals and talking to people who have studied fires across the world. I constructed my hypothesis based off of my question and my research methods, the background research that I did. I tested it with my methodology, collecting all my data to calculate the number of acres burnt in each of these images. And now that I've done all that, we can start analyzing the data. And analyzing your data takes a lot of forms, but in very base, what you're doing is you're often comparing means, medians, and modes. So I'm comparing the mean amount of acres burnt in 2019 and 20 compared to the mean amount of fire that burnt between 2013 and 2018. Now, of course, it's easy to show that those means are different, but sometimes you want to ask, how different are they? What does it mean to actually be different? And so there are a lot of statistical tests that allow you to ask that question. How different are your groups? And one of the classic ones is a student's t-test. And essentially, you collect a bunch of data between one group and another, and that test will tell you if they are significantly different from each other. Chi-square tests are also very similar, but they test how different your data is from what you expected your data to be. Which is a nuanced difference, but there are two different tests that I've used in my research that I'll show you here. So this is the results. This is the meat of what I produced right here. These are the fire models for Saipan. And what these models show in panel A, you see all the fires that have occurred on Saipan between 2013 and 2020. Every individual spot that has had a fire is color coded. If that spot has burnt more times, it is redder. So you can see in all these different hot spots, the redder areas are the areas that have burnt more times and are within the time period of the study. So you see the Marpy area in B burns super often. Some of these areas have burnt, some of the Cowtown area has burnt up to 14 times. Same in Wireless Ridge. The core grassland has burnt 14 times, while some of these other exterior grasslands have burnt much fewer times. The panel D is Mount Tapachow. I'm not sure if you all remember this season, this past fire season, like June, July, that massive grassland near Tapachow burnt. And that's what we're seeing right here, that a fire was detected in the dry season of 2020 here. And then, of course, we have the areas, the kind of farmland, grassland areas near the airport and Cobblerville. And what we're seeing is quite a few repeated fires in these areas as well. In fact, a lot of these areas burned this season, impacting quite a few people, actually, a lot of farms and some homes even. And now we can quantify this on a graph. So what I'm showing here is the pink bars are the dry seasons. And of course, dry seasons mean we're not getting a lot of rain compared to the wet seasons in white here. And what we would expect was that every year you have a spike in these dry seasons in the amount of fire that we're detecting through Landsat. And so what we're showing here is not only are we getting the spikes that were expected in the dry seasons, but you'll notice that these last two spikes here in 2019 and 2020 are much bigger than the spikes that we were seeing in the past. So can we come to a conclusion that things are different? Yes. Can we say that it's due to climate change or that this will be a pattern going into the future? Not quite yet, just because we don't have enough data. We would need to continue this study for multiple more years to come to the conclusion that the amount of fires in Saipan are increasing over time. But what this does do is lay the groundwork to suggest, hey, maybe something's a little bit off. Maybe we shouldn't be having 3 times the amount of fire now than we did in 2018. Something might be happening to cause that. And that can facilitate more research, or that can start a new question. And then the scientific method starts over again. This is a really cool graph, and this shows one of the problems with successive fires in a single area. And then they started looking at 2 different spots in Wireless Ridge. So in A and B, what we're looking at is a grassland that burnt in 2013 and then burnt again in 2016. And what I'm showing here is that in 2013, this fire was actually fairly constrained, but because it burnt, it created new pathways for fire to burn additional grasslands. You see that in 2016, this area that was previously cut off no longer is, and this grassland is now starting to catch fire. It's also possible that an ember could have burnt across, but one of the things we're scared about are the expansion of grasslands due to fire. As it burns new, bigger forests, and those forests get converted into grasslands, and those grasslands burn repeatedly. So you get a cycle, a facilitation of fire, creating more fire in the future. And this is just some extra data that I was looking at, but I wanted to look at how much rain impacts the amount of fire that we detect. So I calculated within each Landsat image how much rain was, or how much precipitation there was in the 2 weeks prior to the Landsat image being collected. And then on the right, and then I plotted it on the left. And then on the right, I was calculating how many days went by without rain before the Landsat, before the fires were detected in Landsat. And just really quick, what we're seeing is that as we detect more fires, there was less rain recorded, which makes sense. If there's less rain, there's probably going to be more fires. And on the right, what we're showing is that as the number of days without rain increased, we also saw the amount of fires burn. And what I haven't studied this yet, but this is for future research. I am pretty sure that the amount of rain really is not as much consequential to the amount of fires that occur, because our soils are so porous in this area. And so when you have, if say you just had 1 day of a really heavy rain, that rain might just percolate right through the soil and might not keep things wet. And so you might have a lot of rain and a lot of fires. And instead, what might be more important is the number of days that go by without rain. It might be more important to have a lot of days with a minimal amount of rain to keep things wet, instead of 1 day with a lot of rain and then a lot of days without any rain. So this is going to be some future research that I am doing after I'm finished with this product here. And then I also wanted to show you all that the land cover type really matters for showing where fires are going to occur. So you see on the bottom graph, these are the type of land covers we have in Saipan. We have land, cultivated land, this is like farmland, evergreen forest, grasslands, and these three are different types of wetlands, and then pasture and scrub. And what I'm showing here is that grasslands are far more likely to burn than forests or any other land cover type. And so of all the fires detected, 40% of those fires occurred in grasslands. And this is important because grasslands actually only contribute 6% of the entirety of Saipan. So only 6% of the land is burning 40% of the time, which is massive. And again, this has really big policy implications, because now we know that grasslands are the ones that we should be focusing on in terms of revegetation or protection, mitigation, be ready to go out and fight fires there instead of the wetlands, for example, which burn almost none of the time. So after you've analyzed your data, you can start pulling your conclusions out of it. Remember that this is an observational study, not an experimental study. So I can't come to any causal conclusions, but I can come up with some correlations and general patterns. And what I've shown is that 3,900 acres of land have burnt between 2013 and 2020, which is massive. That's a lot of land. You don't even see that in Florida, which is an area that actually needs fires for ecological processes to occur. The years with the most amount of burn were 2019 and 2020, which might hint at a pattern into the future showing that fires are getting worse on Saipan. We showed that 4 locations in particular are heavily impacted: the Marpi area, the grasslands in Wireless Ridge, Mount Tapachau, and the grasslands around the airport are all areas that burn very often. And then finally, we have shown that fires often cross barriers to new locations and cause even more fires to spring up that way. And so we're worried that as more fires occur, now we might have more fires in the future. So we're going to try to do at BECQ, we're going to try to do as much as we can to reduce the amount of fires that occur on Saipan. And then finally, at the end of the scientific method, you want to communicate your results. You want to do what I'm doing right now. You want to share your results to people who live where you are. While you are doing your research, I'm assuming you'll probably present your methods or your data to the class at the end, or to your teacher, or to your community. In this way, you can spread your research, you can spread your findings so that other people see what you are doing. And then others might be able to build off of what you did in the future. Specifically, my research is going to academic journal, a peer-reviewed journal, which means that other scientists are going to review my methods to see if they're sound, and they'll give me some feedback. I'll take their feedback, or maybe I'll disagree with their feedback, and we'll see what happens if that happens. But in general, it means that other scientists will be able to look at my research and maybe come to some conclusions of their own, or further the area of fire studies on Saipan. And of course, all my research is going to be going into these management plans that I'll be working on with groups out here such as DFEMS for CUC, because this is really important information for them. And then of course, all our future research, all knowledge is built on the back of previous studies. So hopefully whatever I do here, maybe the next Coral Fellow will be able to study that even further. And same thing for your research. Hopefully, maybe the next year's students might pick up what you did and further what you studied this year. And that's really the presentation. Thank you so much. And please feel free to ask any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ilan. That was great. Yeah, we have some time for questions. I'd love for students to ask some questions about your project or any of the methods the steps that you took in it. But yeah, that was fascinating. Thank you. So some questions from students.
Feel free to ask other questions. I do a lot of coral studies out here. I've worked with a lot of people at NMC. There's some amazing internships that are paid. If you end up going to NMC and doing a natural resources degree, I've worked with a lot of them. Anything.
Maybe to grease the wheels a little bit. Echoing somewhere. Your graph on acres of fire and acres burnt. I was really impressed with how you visually showed us your results. Do you have any tips on how to show what you found, and like how did you come up with this graph? Is this based off background research you've done, or is this just something that?
Yeah. So I'll say graphic design is so important for scientific communication. You want your graphs to be easily understandable. And I'll admit, I am not the best at this. There are people who are so much better. There are entire college classes that are dedicated to making pretty graphs, basically. But what I like to do is make my graphs as simple as possible so people can understand. And what you want to do is highlight the patterns that you're trying to get people to see. So I want to show the spikes I wanted to show two patterns here, right? I wanted to show how trends have changed throughout the entire study from 2013 to present, which means a line graph. But I also want to highlight the interannual variation that occurs between the dry seasons and the wet seasons, to highlight these pink bars to show that these fires are occurring in the dry seasons. So when you all are making your graphs for your projects, for your papers, something that you want to keep in mind is, what am I trying to show with this data? And once you know what you're trying to show, then you can create your graphs to really highlight those aspects. These, for example, what I really wanted to show was that not only are grasslands more likely to burn, but I wanted to show how much. So I added the percents on to show that there's a large discrepancy between the amount of grassland that burns and the amount of grasslands that actually occur on Saipan. And in my manuscript, actually, there's a second panel here that compares it to the percentage of composition on Saipan to show the discrepancy between those two figures. But yeah, just make sure you want to show, make sure you know what you're trying to show with your data.
Questions from students? Just make sure you unmute your mic.
So, examples from something unique.
I think I hear someone trying to ask a question, but they're a little bit muffled.
Yeah, Jesse, we're having trouble hearing you.
Jesse, try taking your face mask off. That'll help.
Is this better? Or
Yeah, you're much clearer now, Jesse. Good.
okay, so you gave examples of Guam and California, but what is something unique about Saipan's land that doesn't occur in those other places?
That's actually a really good question. So California is quite a bit different, of course, from Saipan. They don't have the same grassland fire dynamics that we have, but Guam is actually an amazing case study for Saipan because they do have the exact same grassland dynamics that we do have out here. I would say the biggest difference between Guam and Saipan would probably be the size. Guam is obviously quite a bit bigger. The grasslands are much more expansive. And that causes quite a few differences in fire dynamics because fires can spread farther and faster than out here on Saipan, which makes responding to fires on Saipan quite a bit easier. But an interesting fact for about Saipan and Guam and Micronesia in general is that fire is not natural. There are sediment core studies that show that fires really did not occur on these islands until about 4,000 years ago, which coincides with about the time that people first made their way to these islands. And that's very different to, say, California, which naturally has fires, has naturally had fires for millions of years. So that would be one of the big differences between like Micronesia and mainland United States is that fires are not natural out here. They are human caused.
Thanks, Jesse. That's a good question. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Yeah, Lindsay.
Hello. Yes. So, how did you find out that Landsat is actually a really useful tool for your research?
So that's a good question. Like I said, I'm a spatial ecologist. So most spatial ecologists use a technique for studying the world called remote sensing. And that is the use of vehicles, satellites, or anything that is not your eyes, basically, to study the environment. So Landsat is a very commonly used tool in environmental studies because it collects so much data from all across the world. So I'm very lucky that my background, my master's degree, allowed me to learn more about Landsat and other remote sensing techniques, such as drones, very similar thing as the satellite. These drones, you can fly up and take pictures. But yeah, so my schooling is what allowed me to learn more about Landsat and how to actually use it.
That I actually had one question about that. How do you get access to Landsat data?
So there's a lot of ways. The best, and I can send this to you all if you're very interested. There's a website called Remote Pixel Viewer, and I can text it to you or email you. But essentially, it's the easiest way. You can click on different land masses, and you can go through a catalog of all the images that Landsat has taken and download it from there. What I did is, again, my background gave me a lot of automation skills. So I do a lot of work coding, computer programming. I use the language Python. and allows me to download massive amounts of data from Remote Pixel Viewer all at once, so that I don't have to individually go through each image to download it. But yeah, Remote Pixel Viewer is a great website that allows you to look at all the Landsat images that are currently collected.
Thanks, Ilan. We're out of time here. We're heading into third period, but thank you so much. It was a great presentation. We really enjoyed it. And
thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, we may do a follow-up with you. I'm sure there are more questions. I know I have a ton just about your process, but yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope you all stay safe and have a good rest of your day.
Will do.